Video 2, we're going to be looking at our second source that we're going to be adding into the 3D world, and that is going to be a light layer. And a light layer, we're going to be looking at how it can affect, your colors of 3D layers. Depending on what we do to the material options, we can then, adjust the shines depending on the light settings and the source itself. And each light will, be then focused on a point of interest, but really we're going to be looking at what a light can do, and that's illuminate 3D layers. It can create, cast shadows. It can match lighting conditions of the scene into which you may be compositing. If you're bringing in a video source, which we're not going to be doing that. And you can animate your light settings, but the only things you cannot animate are everything except for two, and that's your light types. You can't change from parallel to spot in the middle of it, and we can't also change the cast shadow properties, so we can't do any of that while we're animating our light. But right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a light source. And again, we can do that by going up to Layer, Create, New, New, and do Light, or we can go down here, right click in the timeline and come up to New and Light. And so what happens is it brings up our light settings. And I'm going to go ahead really quick and type this light right, kind of like light bright, if you played with it as a kid, or light, I don't remember what it's called, but I think it's light bright. Yeah, anyway. I'm going to keep everything else the same as of right now. We'll look at this in a moment, but I'm going to go ahead and close it up. And as I do that, it creates a light, but I'm going to grab my selection tool. But as we know, it is not doing anything yet. But if we notice the layer itself that is created, it automatically creates a light layer in 3D World. So you cannot go ahead, we cannot change that like our right layer. We can go ahead and say I want that to be 2D, I want it to be 3D. We cannot do that in our light layer. It automatically is created in 3D space, and we can move it around just like we can anything else in 3D World. So that's one thing we can do. And what we have to, in order to, if we want to create a shadow or cast a shadow or any type of shine, we have to go into our properties and go down to material options for our text layer. And first thing, we're going to look at this again a little bit later, but I just want to look at the first one, and that's cast shadows. And I'm going to go ahead and say, I want to cast shadows. Okay, so I've put that on, and still nothing has happened. And you're probably like, well, why hasn't it happened? Well, it's because it's got nothing in the background yet to apply it to. So I'm going to go ahead and create another layer. We're going to create a solid, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to bring it underneath, and again, we're probably like, it's still not doing anything. Well, we have to change a few things in order to get this. Is we have to make sure, again, remember talking about 2D space, that everything automatically starts on the Z plane. So for me to play around with this, I'm going to first have to kind of bring this out about away from this, but it's still not going to do anything because there's one more thing I have to do in order to create a shadow, is take this white solid and make it in 3D space. And bam, look at what happened. So this is things that, when we're looking at our transform, let me go ahead and move this back a little bit. Actually, let's move it forward. So as you notice, as I move it kind of back and forth, we're playing with that space. So I'm actually going to do a little bit different. Instead of having it right on the background, I'm going to go ahead and rotate it on the x-axis. I'm going to do it the other way. And as you notice, it's kind of getting that light effect. We can see where it is. And as we start to move in the 3D world, I'm actually going to introduce you, as I introduce multiple things to you guys within this chapter and this video especially, is it can be kind of difficult just to be looking at your this one composition window and this one view. Let me go ahead and move real quick just this along the line. But as we notice that, and if I wanted to maybe move the light source itself, as I can tell, we've got that shadow, so to say, but it's kind of hard to see from this angle what's going on. So right here in our composition window, we have this one that we can change different views. So I'm going to create a 2 view, and as you notice, this second view, we've got our active camera, which we can see, and we can still change and move around. But as we notice, when we do that, it's moving in this screen right over here, which right now we can see it's in top. So depending on what you want to do in what view, so if I have this selected, I can see it's got the corner saying that this top view is selected. I can change it if I want to front, which that is. left, I can change it to the side. I can do a lot of things, but I'm going to play around from the top. And I can, again, can change my camera, or not my camera, but my light from that view. And so we can play around with that. And as I do that, it's saying, okay, well, what am I trying to do and how am I going to do that? So we remember from the light itself, I don't really care about casting shadows. We'll see what happens with that. But it's not going to cast a shadow because it's not going to see the source, but I want to accept shadows. And I also want to play around once we get kind of everything set up for material options. We've got our cast shadows on, accept shadows, playing around with that. I'm going to go into our light source. Now I'm going to start playing around with kind of what we have going in here. And so go ahead to go back into our light settings. What I can do is I can either double click on this layer, and when I do that it brings up our light settings, or I can come up here to layer, go to light settings, or Control Shift Y as you see that. And so as I look at this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start playing around with these settings. So we've got our spotlight, and what we have with we have our parallel light, which is pretty much like the sun. So we see how bright that is, and if we come in here, we can kind of already see that we've created the shadow and how bright it is. We can see the shadow there. And we can change, our color, maybe if we're doing something very mood-esque, it's, creating that red spill. I'm going to play around with just a little bit in between the white and black. So we've got just a little bit darker off. And then this intensity. So if I wanted to take that parallel light and maybe make it less intense, I could bring that down, again doing extremes so I can see how the light is moving. I'm going to go back to spot and play around with that for a bit. And as I do the spot, it's going to jump, and we notice that we still have, this spotlight. I'm going to go ahead and I can't move the camera yet or the light while I've got this open, but I can change this cone angle. And that's the one thing that you can do with spot, noticing that when I change from light type, the different options I get. So I'm going to close this angle just a little bit and make it a little more extreme. Maybe not that much. Let's go ahead and I like that right there. And we can do the cone feather. So if we want to feather it, or take that off a little bit, make it less feathered, which does exactly like you see. It makes it really crisp, sharp edges. And if I do the feather all the way up, we can see how it softens and feathers the edges. With this, the radius, again, playing with these settings, figuring out how it's going to affect your light source, the fall off distance, what's it going to do within all that, and changing the shadows. So I'm going to go ahead and say I kind of like that right now, so I'm just going to go ahead and I can always go back into that. And I'm going to come into this, and I'm going to do a left view. I want to see where my light is. So I'm going to go ahead and come in here and play around with the light just a little bit, and I'm going to go over to my right side. And if you know you're going to be moving around in 3D space quite a bit, you can jump up to your four views, and with that see pretty much every side. And so we've got left, right, front, and so if I know I'm going to be moving kind of round, and I can change again any of these if I want. So like this front one, I've got two fronts, not necessary. I'm going to go to the top view, see how that looks from there. And I'm going to play around with a little bit more, just kind of setting up how I want. Now, so I've moved it around a little bit, and again, this takes patience and practice and just, getting comfortable with being in 2D space or 3D space, which takes a while. But if I notice right now, and I'm going to go back to that 4 view, just so you can see, looking at that point of interest. So this middle part of this is for the light is saying this is where I want the light to focus. So I can move that, and as I do so, it's going to take my point of interest to a different spot. And so now I've got that just in front of the light, or in front of the text layer. And so again, changes where that light source is. And since I'm moving this from the top, I can then go up here, move it from the left, I can move it from the front, and really try to figure out where do I want the light to shine. How do I want it to hit? Do I want to hit, low within the text? And if I do that, we can see it's kind of changing up, our shadow. and I can move it up, and maybe I want it to hit right at. Okay, and if we notice that, I'm going to undo that. I actually didn't have the point of interest. I had the entire light moving. So if we see that. So as I do that, I'm going to go back to my two camera view, two light view. I'm going to go horizontal the way I like. And let's go ahead and zoom in just a little bit. And we can kind of see now with this video, I know it's getting longer, but there's a lot going on. We can now see that we've got a little bit of animation going on, and so maybe, you know, or not animation, but just movement. I'm going to go ahead and transform our text, and I'm going to rotate it on, you know, I'm going to do it on the Y. So I'm just going to kind of rotate it out just a little bit and play around and see how that looks. So maybe I want to face it more towards the light. So as we do that, we can kind of see, do a two-top view. So we can now kind of from top, we can see right, and we can see right here. Yeah, I know, I'm an idiot, but it's still playing around in this, you know, creating a world. The more you create a world in 3D space, you're going to want to set it and not really animate. And the nice thing is, you know, and I'll go ahead and cut this video here and continue on with the next video, is getting into camera movement and how we can move around what we create without having to animate all these layers.